Tracy, let's start with you with respect to what is the digital economy, and what is the level of participation currently within the Caribbean, and why should we increase or seek to increase higher levels of participation in digital economy within the Caribbean?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'd just like to start by saying I'm going to give a quick story and by a show of hands see who we've experienced this. I was at a conference in the US last week, and I used cash maybe once in my entire week stay. And I was wanting to give a tip. From the flight to the US, from taking a lift LYFT from the airport to the hotel, I tipped the driver using the app, Lyft, paid with the app. So you may think I used this, right? Everything else, I use this. I use my phone. I paid for most of my items using NFC type payments, Android Pay in this case. I stayed in my hotel room and I used the new Amazon Prime service where things came to you within an hour, which was kind of cool. And I had my credit card stored, so I didn't use my credit card per se. So I bought things like groceries, everything that came to my hotel room at free shipping, tipping the driver, all online. I traveled around using Uber and Lyft. I paid for the hotel, well, using credit cards, but stored credit cards previously. I never took my credit card out to pay for my room. And I actually saw an interesting thing emerging in the US, and over the last year I've seen it, where, anyone's familiar with Square, the Square solution? Right, so Square started as a solution where you would put a little device into your headphone jack on your phone, and you swipe a card, right, and you could pay. So I saw taxi drivers using that at one time. I saw some, people in New York on the streets using it, which is kind of cool. But I also saw Square have these registers now, point-of-sale registers, where they're taking credit cards and NFC payments. So I was able to see quite a few of those things in the US. So just by show of hands, how many people have been to the US and have started seeing these kinds of movements away from traditional payments, away from cash, certainly to credit cards, and more so to your phone? Anybody is the show of hands? Right. So you're seeing it happening. I've been telling my colleague Nerissa for some time that this is disappearing. This is going to vanish. This thing called a credit card is going to vanish. You still have credit card accounts, but the physical card is going to vanish. What does that mean for the digital economy and for us as a Caribbean people? I went into Best Buy in the US and saw these Square devices on the shelf for sale. They're hanging off the rack. And you could pick it up for $9.99 for the chip and for and other things, up to $49.99 and so on. Just leave the store with it, go away, and suddenly you're an entrepreneur, just like that. You go online, you activate your account. Of course, it's the US, so it will be a little easier. But that's happening in the world today. Everybody can become an entrepreneur literally by walking into a store, picking up a cash register, and having an account set up, just similar to a Stripe system, the Stripe Atlas system, and set up an account. For us in the region, and for us in the Caribbean, we're going to be left very far behind if we don't understand and truly understand what is happening. The traditional business model that we are facing, that the banks are forcing upon a lot of our countries, are changing rapidly. So we've seen a couple of banks, maybe one named the bank, introduce point-of-sale type devices. But how have they done that? Have they done it traditionally, or have they done it using a new model where you understand you have to pay a rent for the device and so on, so which is not what is happening. You just buy the device in the US. Now, the digital economy. Now, that word digital is interesting. Who knows what does digital mean? What does it mean? Anybody guess? What's that? What is digital? I've heard that word. I'm a digital economy strategist. But what does that word digital mean? Anybody? Give a guess. I mean, understands what digital means? No, we just made it up. Digital is a word that was called ICT years ago. It was called E the other day. So we had e-business, now we have digital business. We had e-government, we have digital government. So we'll call it internet, online. It's just a word that means we're now using technology to enable most of our day-to-day lives and transactions. And from where I sit, the economy that's emerging is not so much more of a digital economy than a sharing economy. It's a peer-to-peer economy. And what you're seeing happening is that the larger corporations and so on are going to start losing share to entrepreneurs like yourselves as you emerge and able to participate at little or no cost in that economy and use things like ratings. You're just using ratings to measure if you're a good customer or you're a good buyer, as you're using the ability to transact on shared platforms that the banks don't themselves own. In some cases, you yourselves might own the platform on a crowd platform. You may yourself own the platform, have a share in that platform. We're going to see the economy shifting very rapidly to that model. And in the Caribbean, where we're still stuck with the thinking of going to a bank to get a loan to start a business, and the bank saying yes or no, and then offering you merchant accounts, and if you can you qualify for it. I was at a recent payment presentation where the bank person, one named the bank, said that only a few can qualify for a new e-commerce platform. Only a few. And those people know who they are. So not everybody can qualify for this e-commerce platform. What does he mean by that? I don't know. I was like, what do you mean by that? So we have to qualify the customers. And so he's basically saying who makes us the most money and who will probably not, create fraud or something like that. We are going to, basically, I think in this economy, we are going to start moving away from that thinking of traditional business, traditional banking models, traditional payment systems into this new peer-to-peer shared economy.
So that brings us to a good point, and it was pointed out earlier in the cases that the requirements for entrepreneurs right now to be able to receive payments are somewhat onerous, somewhat subject to red tape, somewhat subject to higher costs. So brings me to the next question. Do local merchant account solutions for e-commerce providers work just fine? Or do we need a different approach towards the ability to receive payments? Gabriel?
Just to be clear, your question was pertaining to are the current solutions in place adequate?
Yes.
They're absolutely not.
Okay.
We'll start from the top, the barriers to entry. We all know it's tattoo the banker's name to the left arm before you can get an account. The fees, 99% of what you make in a month, and that's just the service fees. And then also we have the issue of accessibility. Is the product being offered truly an accessible product? So the market definitely isn't there, or rather the services on the market definitely is not there. And it's a very amateur market in the sense that it's almost been held back by the banking monopolies. There was no incentive to offer a better solution. The e-commerce market of the Caribbean has dramatically suffered. I originally started off my career after finishing my degree in security systems, and I went into software development. And we ran one of the largest, still to this day, largest development agency on the island of Barbados. And the single-handed biggest problem of every single website was access to payments. And I've noted there's a couple of solutions. There's someone from Montserrat who maybe lived in England, and so she has a British or a Canadian or American bank account. But that's maybe like 2-3% of us in the Caribbean. So there's around 97%, closer to actually 99% of the people in the Caribbean just simply don't have the ability to become online entrepreneurs. And they're focused looking at what's on their shores and only what's on their shores. And that really holds back an entrepreneur when you're looking at a population of what's the largest island. Maybe if we look at DR, 11 million, there's a multi-billion person country out there. It's called the internet. And our regulators haven't updated legislation to speak towards that. In some cases, some islands are forward-thinking, Trinidad, Jamaica. The central banks usually don't want to look at risk-based systems because risk, of course, their main mandate is to protect their citizens. And then finally, the banks. The banks aren't willing to evolve their systems to provide open, all-inclusive systems because they themselves are threatened from correspondent banking relationships. So banks themselves can lose their accounts with their correspondent banking partners if they don't follow strict and stringent rules. So to answer your question in very simple terms, there's absolutely no viable solution for the average Caribbean person at present. However, I've heard a lot of sad stories earlier about the problems that exist in the digital economy, how nice things are in America when you have a cashless society. And there are solutions that are in place right now, are coming towards being fully placed into markets that do offer entrepreneur the ability to immediately start selling online and receiving payments, the ability to not have to worry about someone trying to drop off $12,000 on a Sunday to you in cash. They can send that payment digitally. The ability to use your phone and NFC communication to walk into a local Rituals restaurant, coffee shop and take my phone out, pap, and I've bought my coffee. And it can all be done locally. These solutions, once again, exist. It's just a matter of the regulators, the central banks, the governments, and of course the private citizens to come together to say that this solution is needed and the time is now. And that's pretty much where we're at.
And that's a good point to get into, to hear the views from the OECS, because I know the OECS, a couple of issues that Gabriel raised there was around legislation, risk-based approach towards looking at risk. But I know the OECS has been looking at some aspects of e-payment and crowdfunding. Can you share some of what you guys are doing right now?
Well, for the OECS, over the last few years, we've been looking at harmonizing what we do across the islands, because you would realize that the OECS now is made up of 10 members, including Martinique. Now we are just past the million mark in terms of population. So for us, with all the small islands, we want to ensure that what is in one jurisdiction applies in the other. Because of our economic union that is fully in effect, well, we're trying to get it fully in effect now in the OECS. We have free movement of people, and we're trying to get to a point of free movement of goods. We need to ensure that the legal framework for electronic transactions is in place. So because of that, we did a few consultancies. We did draft a few pieces of legislation. Most of the islands have passed most of the pieces of legislation, but for some reason or the other, the governments have held back one or two bills in certain cases due to different concerns, more of them being data protection, some of them being consumer protection, electronic crimes. So for us at the OECS Commission, it's a bit difficult and challenging for us to be able to roll out, a full program looking at how we can help SMEs. The unit that I head is called the Competitive Business Unit, based out of Dominica, and we are basically responsible for SME development across the 10 islands. We've been looking at ways in which we can influence the governments and going directly to the SMEs and looking at their needs. So for us, you mentioned crowdfunding. We found that a lot of them did not have access to finance. And rather than wait around for the banks, because the banks basically operate on an 80-20 rule, where 80% of their profits are driven by 20% of their clients, what about the other 80% of the clients who need access to finance? So we thought that crowdfunding is an opportunity for us So in 2015, we decided to do some crowdfunding training, and we felt that the results were very successful, so we duplicated it in 2016, and including the youth now, because for us in the OECS going forward, we are very keen on looking at the youth and encouraging the youth to take a look at the economy, because our leaders, our youth of today is basically our leaders of tomorrow. So crowdfunding for us is an opportunity for access to finance.
Okay. So, I mean, even Nerissa brought up some issues about coming on to the end of her slides there. Things like digital currency. I will add mobile money. We heard this morning that replication of the M-Pesa model doesn't necessarily work in other areas. What may be some of the inhibiting factors? Because here it is. What I'm getting from the panel is that we need more easier ways to transfer value between parties. That when you boil it down, that's what it comes down to. But hearing that contribution this morning from the ITUFG DFS participant, replicating that M-Pesa model in other territories has been not very successful. What are some of the ways we can enhance the transfer of value between parties within the Caribbean? Gabriel?
Well, it all boils down to utility, really. There's little evidence to suggest that the M-Pesa model will not absolutely work when given the right ingredients. The topic of this discussion is the current status of the digital economy participation. And if we look at countries and territories like Trinidad that are boasting over 150% penetration rate of mobile, Barbados similarly over 100 penetration rate of mobile, and then you're talking about access to internet. But then similarly to Kenya, you have low access to financial services. So the accessibility of mobile is very high, but the accessibility to financial services is very low. So the M-Pesa model did not work in jurisdictions where the accessibility to financial services were already high. There was already a PayPal solution or something to that extent. But when you look at a jurisdiction like Barbados or Trinidad or Jamaica or Dominican Republic, there's absolute utility of where you can see a crossover of M-Pesa's model being extremely successful. The inhibiting factor has been the regulatory frameworks, the restrictions put there on the entrepreneurs who want to build out these systems. We came to the table with a digital solution around 3 years ago, but there was no shy of a dozen guys that have been trying to do it for the last couple of years. We were by no means the first. However, the problem is that these guys feared regulators rather than approaching the regulators with solutions that consistently refined the needs of regulation. But to bring it all back in, the problem boils down to it really with the forward-thinkingness of Caribbean nationals and specifically the governments. So I don't see a situation where an M-Pesa will not work in the Caribbean if there is A, the support of the government, B, the solution built out, and C, the most important part of why it's failing is the utility. If I can't go and pay for my coffee in the morning or my gas or my light bill or to get my payroll to my phone and every service that I could pay for with a physical fiat dollar, if I can't do that with my phone, then you don't have a true cashless society, and this product doesn't always serve me. So this has its failure points. Whereas M-Pesa, one of the main winners for Kenya was the large stacks of their inflated cash and carrying that around. So M-Pesa picked on massively, not just because of their penetration of mobile or lack thereof as it grew, but because of utility. Utility. Someone not wanting to get paid on a Sunday night or walk across a field with a bag of cash to buy a coffee.
So Tracy and Marlon, you guys come from a governmental or quasi-governmental role. How do you treat with entrepreneurs? As Gabriel mentioned, he wasn't first. There was a line of guys behind him. It's just that they didn't treat probably with government officials as they needed to. What should be the approach to find a balance between the entrepreneur's drive to create solutions and provide solutions within an economy and the regulators' need or the governmental concerns around risk? Tracy?
Yeah, so there are some sweet spots or tipping points where that thinking will happen, and in Trinidad and Tobago, we've seen a couple of them, but have not gone far enough. And one of the things that need to happen is, as Gabriel is saying, that the people who are shy of regulators, right, who are challenged by the environment that exists. On the other hand, the government and the regulators need to become more proactive. What we've seen happen in countries where successful platforms may have existed, it's either the regulators were inactive to an extent, i.e. Kenya, or they were proactive, meaning that they were actively pursuing new systems, new transactional systems, new payment systems, whatever it is. Where you have a situation where you have very conservative regulators, or you have societies which are, for a better word, are interested in keeping the status quo, you're going to have a problem in trying to move it beyond a certain point. And in countries like ourselves, and I'm trying to not speak ill of the dead, so to speak, but the government as a whole needs to find a way to listen to its citizens and the demands that they're bringing to the table, and governments, including regulators. And once they listen to those, when I say listen, I mean listen, not hear, listen. Listen carefully. What are you looking for? It may not be a M-Pesa. I was going to give an example that we have a successful value-driven model in Trinidad already. It's top-ups. Everybody does top-ups. Everybody moves value from your phone, phone to phone in some cases, you go to these places and just get slips of paper, and that's happening already. So people understand that money can move in other ways. And I think once that environment is there and the governments and the regulators understand that that is happening, they can facilitate that environment. The problem we're facing is that there's not enough listening happening. So not enough people coming to the fore and saying, this is exactly what we need. And enough government saying, well, how can we help you? And what you have happening again is that the private sector, the large private sector establishment, because there's no push from either direction, they stay in the middle. And I saw somewhere one of those slides where they focus on operating and not I forget the slide that just came up, but that's entirely possible. Yes. Yes, the guy said that yes, that they focus on keeping the operating levels and not profits. So the idea, I think, is that we have to, as a country, as a region, find a way for the entrepreneurial spirit to come forward and not be shy of the regulators. Come to the taps, the central banks, the OECS regulation team, and say, this is what we're looking for, not just import M-Pesa, or not import whatever it is. What are you looking for? How can we help you? How can we grow our economy?
Mm-hmm. I know Gabriel want to respond, but let me just give Marlon a quick.
Yes, let me just talk about e-government and government's responsibility to drive certain technologies in an economy. I'll give you the example of 4 of the OECS islands, Dominica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines and Grenada. About 3 years ago, they launched their tax system. They harmonized their tax system. They decided that they wanted to collect taxes online. Right now, you have the situation where the Inland Revenue in Grenada and Dominica can't collect their taxes online. And this has been in place for the last 2 years, but nobody knows about it. They don't do enough. They have signed contracts with the indigenous banks to be able to collect these payments online, but no promotion goes on. So, it sort of falls on the government as well. We don't want to say everything falls on the government, but sometimes the government needs to play an active role in ensuring that certain things get done in an economy.
Yeah, I know. Let's just give Gabriel a chance to respond to that.
I normally don't say this, but in the government's defense.
But that's just what I was going to say. I was gonna hold out all of a branch to the banks and the government, because
to the government's defense, governments inherently want to do good for their people. They inherently want to rise up their people and solve problems and meet great solutions because it makes them look good. So they want to pat themselves on the back. The problem is governments are actually really lazy. And that's where the entrepreneurs come in. So when these other guys that were behind us were having problems, it was related to the bottlenecks at government or our regulation. And we realized that no one was here to do our work for us. So a group of us, over a dozen of us, throughout a period of over 12 months, one of them is sitting in the back of the room as well, spent a lot of time building processes, procedures, and institutionalizing of a conceptually new business. And that had never been done before, no paths had been cut. We did the entrepreneurship thing. And then we took that to government, and we got rejected. And then we got rejected, and then we got rejected, and then we got rejected. And it's not a problem of the fact that the government's not listening. We realized it was a problem of we're not asking the right questions. And then we started to ask the right questions, and then they formulated around, this is what you were missing, this is what you needed to put in. And after 3 tireless years, we were able to get the full permission and support of our government. And it wasn't through them lifting a finger. And that's the ultimate truth. Government wants to help you. They want you to just do all the work. And that's where I add my 2 cents.
All right. Sorry.
I was going to say for the OECS especially, we have a stable currency, and there's a lot of pride in that. And you talked about utility being necessary, and so for a lot of people, because they're so comfortable in the fact that it's always $1 US to 2.7 EC dollars, there is really no momentum to do anything. In the case of Montserrat, I'm hoping our current challenges of a population the size of 5,000 people, with almost half of that being employed by government or at all, that would be some momentum to want to push for that. Because when we only have an economy of 1 million people in the OECS, that's actually a good sample size to really be testing a lot of these things. And it's how to get us out of this comfortable position to say, wait a minute, if we don't do something, we're actually really losing out. And I'm wondering how we can create a conversation around the dollars and cents of this is what's happening, and the Caribbean is out of this financial conversation because we're not participating more fully.
Well, the dollars and cents part can be very easily worked out with an exchange or indexing markets, but I don't think we're being left out in the Caribbean. Back onto the supporting government. Our government in Barbados has been extremely forward-thinking with the digital currency movement, and to the extent where members of our government and central bank have been talking to other members of governments and central banks in the region. And I know this because I've been the recipient of a phone call from a random minister or governor. So the good news is they are starting to move forward, and the great news is that there's a governance in Barbados that believes that while we are small, there's a direct need for a solution like this that's homegrown, built in the Caribbean for the people of the Caribbean. So I do believe that there is a solution for Montserrat, which is the exact solution we're using in Barbados. But once again, it just requires an entrepreneur to step up to the plate, challenge the regulators and the government, and then take the steps forward where the project just doesn't die because it wasn't being pushed forward, but the entrepreneur has to keep driving and pushing. And that's really the failure that we're looking at here, is the lack of entrepreneurship with the mix of government. But I postulate that this year, especially what we're seeing in the Caribbean, is that our people are starting to rise up to the VC space, to the entrepreneurship space, to challenging the whole ecosystem of I want to be a digital global citizen. So I'm not too worried about Montserrat being solved within 12 to 24 months with a digital solution. I'm pretty positive it's coming.
All right. Want to open up the floor for any questions? Please state your name and affiliation.
Cleveland Thomas, ITU. First, really good presentation, excellent exchange as it is. But the person who might be listening out there, to get another perspective of the whole digital financing or currency or e-money, whatever we choose to call it, I think two things we probably need to also have a short conversation on, given that time is against us. Might very well be that there are certain risks associated with the whole issue of digital financing. And I don't know that we have had that side of the discussion as to what risk the average person who is not aware of this or who might be interested in even probably pursuing some of the things that we have heard, what one needs to be mindful of, if anything at all. Because someone may say there is no risk and it's all well and good, but I think it might be useful to just have a bit of a conversation there. I think equally, it might be useful to also recognize that in the ICT world, the issue of time is extremely important, and we don't have the luxury of time. We heard the minister this morning spoke about the need for legislation and regulation, e-transaction and cybercrime and other forms of legislation also to put in place. But the question is, if those things are not in place, do we go full speed ahead in what one may call an unstructured, disorganized, whatever way it might be, while we pursue after the benefits of what's happening in the world? So two key things: sensitive to time, recognizes the challenges, and what risk, if any, the average person out there should be at least be sensitive to. Thanks.
So I'll try and tackle both of them, but this last one first. So you're right, Cleveland, that the legislation, especially in our country, we've been suffering from that challenge. Our legislative process is significantly slow, and delays entrepreneurship, delays innovation, delays creativity by its very nature. However, it's not, as Gabriel says, it's not for lack of trying. There are people, there are in the government trying to push things forward. Unfortunately, what we are seeing now is that as legislation moves, it's moving much slower than the technology. And a lot of legislators don't understand that you have to be technology neutral in doing what you need to do. So they're still trying to patch and fix, and then something changes and they come back again, patch and fix, changes, patch and fix, and by the time you are patching and fixing, nothing is happening. So I do advocate that there must be some middle ground between waiting for this legislation to be in place and getting stuff done. And I'll just go segue straight into the first question, the first point. When I first started working in government, I did an interview with a very large e-commerce entrepreneur in Trinidad and Tobago, who shall remain nameless. But they work in the carnival sector. And this individual, and I had a deep conversation about payments and what was he looking for. And he attempted to use the local market, found it was too expensive. And quite, as Cleveland's an interesting point Cleveland raised, he found that it was too risky, because what he saw in the local market was not equivalent to what he could get on other markets. So he first went to use, let me not name the technology. He used other technologies, and he's still using them today. For him, it's the cost of using that technology today outweighs the risk that he perceives in the local market. And the amount of money he's taking in is unbelievable online. And I think that's important. And in terms of the bank, on the other side, the banking sector, they have constantly told us in government, when I was in government, that as far as they're concerned, there's so much risk to bringing things into this new digital age that they perceive it to be not a priority, or perceive it to be something that we need to do so carefully that, again, things will pass them by. And the entrepreneurs who are doing it now are doing it successfully because they're working with the local banks, I imagine, to a large extent, or the local banking sector, or the local regulators. But those who try to work outside that sector are taking significant risk. And what I fear in seeing these people operate is that when they launch something out with that, they will not get the market take that they're looking for, because the business people who are trying to use them will perceive that as being too risky. I think that's something we have to be very careful about, that we can be too creative sometimes and too smart up with it. So we have to be very, very wary. So it's a very good point, Cleveland.
On the point of risk, I would like to say as well, we had some very good interventions earlier from the Commonwealth Secretariat and the ITU focus group on DFS on the potential risks of emerging solutions, technology, innovation solutions. And I think what we need to find really, and it came out from the panel, is we need to have these conversations going. We need to get the conversations going. And the entrepreneurs need to press on the government and assist them in understanding the risks and the benefits that the solutions could potentially bring to them. Any other questions from the floor? Sure. You can. Yeah.
The time's running out, so this is come.
Yeah. So we only have a few more minutes because we're running a bit late. So. Yeah.
Okay. First, I would like to congratulate you. It was a very interesting panel. Mine is not really a question; it's more of a comment. I've heard many times that we're saying how we can replicate M-Pesa in the Caribbean economy. So I'm asking myself, are we asking the right question? Is it about replicating M-Pesa or trying to see how we can adapt these types of technologies to the realities of our own economy? Personally, I went to Kenya when I was doing research about launching mobile money in Haiti and so forth. I saw interesting things, but I clearly saw that's not what we wanted to do. We wanted to go further than that and try to really go from your cultural context, which is very important, and other factors that need to be taken into account in order to have a solution that is really addressing the needs of your own population. I think that's what I wanted to say. I will have to say more tomorrow in my presentation to show you what other things that worked and didn't work and so forth. But let's try to see from our own perspective how we can use that technology and not try to replicate what was done elsewhere, because it's not going to work.
Agreed. Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, good day. My name is Adrian. I'm saying from the Ministry of National Security. I just want to say that the panel was very eye-opening, and especially with a lot of different options that are available to entrepreneurs. But this brings me to my question. An average entrepreneur starting off in the Caribbean is not aware of these different types of payment methods. Especially you mentioned something like Stripe Atlas. I only know PayPal from day one, right? Everybody knows PayPal, but for the common person who is not even computer literate, what can be done to enlighten entrepreneurs on how to know about these different technologies? And also for the average person who is not computer literate but wants to start off a business and he wants to compete. I mean, you start off small, but he's not just competing like in the Caribbean alone, he's competing in the world. What can be done to bring him up the path to deal with this technology and to compete with these other businesses worldwide? That's it.
Okay. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask a question, stick to a point of clarification based on what Cleveland would have said earlier. And my name is Jeremy Stephen from Barbados. When you look at the risks, or when you ask yourself about the risks from the digital economy that is being proposed by the panel right there, good presentation by the way, and you compare it to what we have as the contemporary economy, you actually see a diversion of the risk. You're a bit more in terms of old money and old cash handling. I would have done a study, I would have done a study up to last year that actually proves that central banks could save a lot more money if they were involved in digital currencies and cryptocurrencies as opposed to actually handling cash. Some people argue very, very strongly that you could expect runs on banks if you've got digital currencies. You could expect capital flight, But the problem is that the size, the market value of these cryptocurrencies is so small. And you've got a ledger, a distributed ledger that's immutable, meaning nobody could really manipulate the system. That you could easily, if regulators work with people like BITT, I will plug if you didn't plug, Gabby, work with people like BITT to actually track the system, then you shouldn't have such a hard time as a regulator in managing that system. So it isn't one without risk. There's some that I'm quite sure you could ask Gabby a lot more about it afterwards, like the 51% risk. That is almost inconceivable when you talk about Bitcoin, but with other cryptocurrencies it's quite conceivable still. And there are others. But the point is that having worked, or should, if the governments do work with agencies, with companies like what Gabby is presenting to everybody, or others that may come about, then there shouldn't be an issue going forward. It would actually be more benefits than costs. And that segues into my literally 20-second intervention with respect to Caribbean entrepreneurs educating themselves. And I do not understand. I actually am very surprised, having done entrepreneurship, lectured in entrepreneurship in Jamaica recently, coming here to hear the same issue that I hear in Barbados, which is one that people expect to be educated about these options up there. No, you're not. There's less than 30 million of us, if we're including the Dominican Republic and Cuba. And therefore, we do not pose an attractive figure to any American company or any of these e-commerce solutions. So that's why you need to be, all of us, regulators, compliance officers, entrepreneurs need to be supporting the initiatives coming out of the Caribbean. And when you really think about it, the blockchain technologies that are being spoken about are ones that allow the cost efficiency and cost effectiveness for small companies to actually impact very positively small businesses in the Caribbean to compete on a global scale. So forget Atlas Stripe.
Yeah.
Focus on BITT.
Good presentation. Now, I would like to take a look from a different angle. I have known both sides of the story. More than 5 years ago, the underlying company that built M-Pesa, I was the lead technical liaison for them in the Caribbean. Came to Trinidad, different Caribbean countries, spoke with regulators, banks, what have you. And to agree with the young man across there, copy and pasting don't work. Yeah? And that's one side. The other side is the local innovation in the Caribbean, local payment systems. I would like to suggest that there are things that work in other parts of the world because of the climate there. We look, see what works for them, right? And see why it works for them, see why it didn't work for them. But we, as mentioned with my counterpart there, Mr. Padmore, that the Caribbean is a different culture. People don't trust online stuff because of the perceived risk and damage, and persons steal your money, your auntie, cousin, friend lost thousands of dollars online. So everybody's afraid. But I think educating people, not just about what's out there, but the pros and cons, how to protect themselves. The same way that persons were educated on how to use your credit card and where not and where to use it. You come to your phone. Now, I will use my phone or credit card to buy stuff online. Educate the persons where to use and where not to use it. Right? 1. 2. To where the gentleman mentioned where persons who operate outside the regulatory framework. One of the main points we need to understand is that if an entrepreneur starts a system and is getting momentum, the regulators will come to them. It is not a long paragraph you have to go through. If there's momentum and people are using the system, the regulators will come to them. And understanding that when the government sees someone is going forward and the government says, okay, well, we will help you, right? And there's that even playing field where the person is not stifled. The next problem is that the banks, because they're in with the government, right? And we need to be very frank about this, they'll try to stifle that. And I think if we come to understanding that, okay, we are going forward and this is the goal, and all parties come to the same table, then we could have a forward-moving solution.
Okay. I allowed the questions to flow because I know we're going to borrow some time from another presentation later on. With respect to the issue of, yeah, don't worry. We'll get it back, don't worry. We'll go on track. Master ceremonies, come on. So, with respect to the issue of replicating M-Pesa, I completely agree, and in fact, me and Bobby will tackle that question later on in our presentation. With respect to education on what are the solutions out there, I think Jeremy put it across, succinctly. We need to better our own education. Nobody's going to come and bring a solution to us. With respect to the issue of entrepreneurs eventually getting there, and then the governments would listen. I think that's exactly what's happening with Gabriel right now. Whereas before he was, banging on doors, now certainly some doors are banging. Yeah, he's getting some attention. All right. If nothing else further, I think we need to close out the session. We're running a bit late, but that's okay. We'll pull back sometime somewhere. All right. I just want to thank the panel, thank the audience for the participation. Thank you.